drew up a list of requirements for the gastric camera. The narrowest point between the mouth and the stomach is the throat. It's only about 14 millimeters wide for an adult. The camera had to be compact enough to clear this passage without injuring the patient. Another requirement was that it had to take pictures of the entire stomach, at least 20 pictures in one procedure. This is one of the cameras Olympus was manufacturing at the time. To make the gastric camera, its functions would have to be packed into a camera body that was at least 10 times smaller. The man in charge of designing the device was Masaharu Fukami. He visited Dr. Uji countless times for lessons in anatomy and physiology. And in 3 months' time, he had produced a blueprint. The camera would be 12 millimeters in diameter. It featured a rounded tip so as to prevent injury to the organs. The three basic components, the film, light, and lens, were arranged in a linear fashion. The idea was simple, but building it was easier said than done. The first headache was the lens. Its diameter was a mere 2.5 millimeters. Olympus had for decades manufactured microscopes, but the smallest lens it had ever produced was 5 millimeters in diameter, 2 times larger than what Fukami's design called for.
We needed a smaller lens, otherwise it would be impossible to fit it on the camera. It had to be extremely small and with an angle wide enough to cover a large portion of the stomach. There wasn't anything like it in the world at the time.
The task of designing the lens went to Zenjiro Doi. After much trial and error, Doi finally succeeded. The polishing of the lenses was entrusted to only the company's most skilled craftsmen. The film had to be 6 millimeters wide, so they cut thin strips of commercially available 35 millimeter film into 30 centimeter long strands. The film strips were wound by hand onto spools and loaded into magazines. The last component needed to take pictures inside the dark pit of the stomach was the light bulb. This was outside the company's field of expertise. Sugiura searched for a company that could produce one. He came upon Masato Maruyama. At the time, Maruyama worked for a company called Life Light Bulbs. It was a beacon in the industry for its technological know-how, and Maruyama himself was convinced he could deliver.
I was told this could be useful to humanity. If I do a good job, it could have an extremely positive impact. So I decided to join the project. It was an easy decision.
Maruyama developed a prototype and started testing it. His main challenge was making a filament that wouldn't burn out after only a few flashes. Making the filament more resistant would result in a dimmer light. The gastric camera needed a very bright light. Maruyama experimented for a full 8 months before finally finding a solution. Among all the designs he tested, he settled on a double-coiled filament. In the end, he was able to develop a light bulb capable of flashing more than 20 consecutive times. At last, the camera's 3 crucial components had come together according to the plan. Vinyl plastic was the material of choice for the tube. The camera was fitted at one end of the tube, and a remote control unit at the other. Here's how the world's first gastric camera worked. The film was unwound 1 frame at a time using the dial on the remote control unit. A button on the unit triggered the light bulb, allowing the lens to capture an image. The sequence was repeated with each photograph taken. Crucial to the procedure was the ability to maneuver the camera inside the stomach. The head had to turn and tilt to cover all possible angles and capture pictures of the whole stomach. A team of doctors tested the camera on animals at a local veterinary clinic. A stomach shrinks when it's empty, resulting in many folds that could conceal a cancerous lesion. So the doctors filled the stomach with water to stretch it open. This is a photo taken during the trials. The image is blurred, the result of gastric fluids mixing with the water. The doctors sought another solution. They tried inflating the stomach with air. This technique proved successful and produced a crisp image. But then they confronted another problem. Which part of the stomach was actually being photographed? One man had a solution. Mitsunosuke Imai was a young surgeon and colleague of Dr. Uji, who had taken part in the trials. 65 years later, he still remembers that moment. It was after nightfall one evening when he was conducting a test.
I was so focused on the experiment that I forgot to switch the lights on after dark. I snapped a picture and saw a small flash. That's when I had the realization.
The room had become so dark, Imai had seen the flash go off inside the animal's body. He was able to tell where the camera was pointing. This became protocol for the procedure, and the gastro camera was to be used in a darkened room. In October 1950, the team was ready to perform its first human trials. A man who complained of stomach problems volunteered to be the guinea pig. Here, Dr. Uji is getting ready to release the shutter. His long-held dream of producing a fully functional gastric camera is about to become reality. And here is one of the pictures taken during that procedure. It clearly reveals the presence of a lesion in the patient's stomach. Doctors and engineers had undertaken this challenge together. They had paved the way towards detecting stomach cancer in its early stages.
In the end, it all came down to Dr. Uji's determination to fight stomach cancer. His efforts to get other doctors on board ultimately convinced Olympus about the need to develop the gastro camera.
In the years that followed, the gastric camera was further improved and loaded with color film. The colors added further detail to the photographs, making it easier to not only spot anomalies in the stomach wall, but also determine their stage of development. The model Dr. Uji and Olympus had developed was the first among a long series of devices that went on to revolutionize medical diagnosis.
And that's how the world's first functional endoscope came to be. The gastro camera was patented not only in Japan, but also in America, the UK, France, and Germany. Olympus put it on the market in 1952. By 1955, Professor Tasaka of Tokyo University had successfully performed more than 600 clinical diagnoses using the gastro camera. The device proved to be so effective that more and more hospitals in Japan were placing orders with Olympus. And by 1960, the company had shipped more than 1,000 units. By 1966, 10,000 gastro cameras had been sold. At the same time, engineers at Olympus were making constant improvements to the endoscope based on the feedback they were getting from doctors in the field. The doctors wanted a way to instantly see inside the stomach and not have to wait for the film to be developed in order to conclude a diagnosis. A fiberscope was the answer. A fiberscope made use of an optic fiber connected to a viewfinder. It gave physicians a real-time view of the inner organ. But the quality of the image wasn't so good. The device was still in its early stages of development in Europe. So Olympus took the idea, improved the image quality, and attached a camera to it. The device became a hit with physicians around the world. Then, in 1985, came a revolution in imaging technology, the digital CCD image sensor. Now, doctors could see live pictures of the inside of a patient's stomach on a TV screen. This was a boon for surgeons and a lifesaver for cancer-stricken patients. The technology greatly improved the survival rate among people with stomach cancer. During this time, the incidence of colon cancer was on the rise, so Olympus invested its energy in developing an endoscope for the large intestine. The key requirement of this device is that it had to produce images with much greater resolution.
Showa University Northern Yokohama Hospital, about 60 kilometers southwest of Tokyo. The facility's Digestive Disease Center boasts one of the most advanced endoscopy treatment units in Japan. The center receives an average of 150 patients per day. An endoscope used for examining the large intestine is called a colonoscope. Its length is at least as long as that of the human large intestine, 1.5 meters. The head of the Digestive Disease Center is Dr. Shinei Kudo. He's a world-renowned specialist in the field of colonoscopy.
Okay, we're going to insert the endoscope. Don't worry, it won't hurt.
Dr. Kudo's expert hands swiftly guide the endoscope through the twists and turns of the large intestine. Keeping the procedure as short as possible is essential to limit the patient's discomfort. When the endoscope encounters a suspicious area, the device is switched to a higher magnification. The examination reveals a polyp, but it turns out to be benign.
Okay, we're done.
The entire procedure took only 5 minutes.
We took a thorough look, and I'm happy to say everything is fine.
Dr. Kudo graduated from Niigata University's medical school in 1973. He began his career as a surgeon and soon entered the field of colonoscopy. At the time, endoscopy was still an elaborate procedure that required the attention of 2 doctors. But Kudo felt there was great potential in this discipline.
When we first started using endoscopes, it usually took 2 full hours just to insert the device. In some cases, the intestine would elongate, and the patient was in a lot of pain. This could be extremely dangerous. The procedure required the full attention of 2 doctors. It was very demanding.
The development of videoscopes in the 1980s allowed doctors to follow the procedure live on a TV monitor. The 30-time magnification made it possible to conduct an instant diagnosis. One day, as he used 30-time magnification, Dr. Kudo discovered something he had never seen before. He immediately focused in on the suspicious area to examine it more closely. The anomaly was a depression in the inner lining of the intestine. It was distinctly different from other anomalies such as polyps, distortions, and certain types of lesions Kudo had previously observed. He removed it with a wire snare and took a biopsy for analysis. The lab test revealed that the lesion was cancerous. It was an extremely rare type of cancer that leads the cells to sink